If you haven't already, please subscribe to most advanced, featured, and accurate channel quick podcast summaries. Tucker Carlson and Piers Morgan sat down in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, for a candid conversation about Ukraine, Russia, and the concept of dictatorship. Carlson started off on a hostile note, asking Morgan how he could call Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky a hero.
Morgan explained that he had interviewed Zelensky in Kiev and found his story extraordinary, from being a comedian to becoming president. However, Morgan also acknowledged that the situation in Ukraine is complicated, with both sides having their own narratives. He expressed concern that if Russia is allowed to take the land it has already occupied, there's no guarantee it won't try to take the rest of Ukraine.
Carlson pressed Morgan on his definition of a dictator, asking if an unelected leader would qualify.
Morgan replied that a dictator is someone who has no respect for democratic norms and free and fair elections.
Carlson pointed out that Putin's elections are not considered free and fair, but Morgan argued that Putin's popularity in Russia doesn't necessarily make him a legitimate leader. Carlson countered that Zelensky is also not elected, having risen to power after a coup sponsored by the U.S. government in 2014. Carlson responded that by Morgan's own criteria, Zelensky is also a dictator, having banned a religious denomination, murdered political opponents, and banned a language group.
Morgan acknowledged that Ukraine has its own set of problems, including corruption, but argued that Zelensky is still a better option than Putin. The conversation turned to the question of whether Putin should be allowed to take Ukraine.
Carlson suggested that the Ukrainian people should be allowed to elect their own leader, rather than supporting an unelected dictator.
Morgan agreed that an election would be a good idea, but argued that the situation is more complex, with Russia's invasion being the primary concern.
Carlson countered that the US and UK have supported many dictators in the past, and that the moral overlay of supporting democracy is often fatuous and fraudulent. The two also discussed the parallels between the Gulf War and the current situation in Ukraine. Carlson acknowledged that he might have supported the expulsion of Saddam Hussein from Kuwait, but argued that the situation in Ukraine is different.
Morgan pointed out that the US and UK have energy interests in Ukraine, and that the country is a major producer of wheat.
Carlson responded that the war in Ukraine is being fueled by the money and arms being sent by the US and UK, and that it would have been over long ago if not for external interference. As the conversation drew to a close, Morgan asked Carlson what he meant by saying that the war would be over if the US and UK hadn't intervened. Carlson explained that he believes Russia would not have invaded eastern Ukraine if the Biden administration hadn't promised to make Ukraine a NATO country, which would have put American arms on the Russian border. This, he argued, would have been a provocation that Russia could not ignore. If you want to listen to the complete summary, please subscribe to Quick Podcast Summaries on Spotify and Apple Podcasts for less than the price of candy in most places, and you can save an average of 15 to 20 hours per week of your precious time. It's a great way to stay informed while saving time.